Okay, what if I told you that measuring the value of oil in dollars is, well, it's a trap? Today, we're diving into a really cool strategy that completely ditches the dollar to help you accumulate more real assets. We're talking about turning your silver holdings into barrels of oil and get this, getting paid interest in even more silver.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't about your dollar profits. I mean, forget about that for a second. This is all about increasing your physical holdings. The entire goal is to end up with more ounces of silver or more barrels of oil than when you started. It's a fundamental shift in mindset, right? Moving away from chasing cash and toward accumulating real, tangible stuff.
So, to really get why this solution is so powerful, we first have to wrap our heads around the problem. The conventional wisdom about profit, buy low, sell high for cash, is what we're going to call the price trap. And it's a trap that can secretly make you poorer even when you think you're winning.
Imagine this. You buy an asset for $1,000, and later you sell it for 2,000. You doubled your money, right? Well, maybe not. This is the profit trap in action. Because if in that same period of time, the dollar lost half of its purchasing power, your new $2,000 can only buy what $1,000 used to. You haven't made any real profit. You've just been treading water. And this really gets to the absolute core of the issue. As the source material so perfectly puts it, the dollar is a broken ruler. I mean, think about it. How can you possibly measure real value when your measuring stick is constantly shrinking? Fiat currency is it's a flawed tool for figuring out what you actually have.
All right, so if the ruler is broken, we need a whole new way to measure. And that's where the goal totally shifts. It's no longer about stacking up more dollars. It's about accumulating more stuff, more ounces of precious metal, more barrels of actual energy.
This slide here breaks down the two mindsets perfectly. Over on the left, you've got the typical price-sensitive investor. They are completely obsessed with the dollar price. Their whole goal is to sell their real assets to get more cash. But on the right, you have the value-centric operator. And this person, they pretty much ignore the dollar price. Their only goal is to use the market swings to swap one asset for another, just so they can end up with more physical stuff, more ounces, more barrels. It's a totally different game. So how do you actually do that? How do you play that game? Well, the strategy is called ratio playing, and it's basically a method for value-centric operators to get the market to pay them interest in the form of more physical assets, all without having to put in any new cash. The absolute key here is that you just stop thinking in dollars. Seriously. Instead, you track the price relationship, the ratio between two real assets. For instance, how many ounces of silver does it take to buy 1 ounce of gold? Or, in our case, how many barrels of oil does it take to buy an ounce of silver? You trade based on that ratio, with the single-minded goal of ending up with more physical stuff. Let me give you a classic example, the gold to silver ratio. Let's say you're holding 10 ounces of gold, and the ratio hits 77-1. Historically, that's high, which means silver is cheap compared to gold. So you make your move. You trade your 10 ounces of what is now expensive gold for 770 ounces of cheap silver. Then you just wait. The market does its thing, the ratio compresses, and let's say it hits 53-1. Now you trade back. And what's the result of that simple trade? Well, you trade your 770 ounces of silver back into gold at that new, lower ratio of 53-1. You now have 14.52 ounces of gold. You started with 10. That is a gain of over 4.5 ounces of pure gold, basically paid for by market volatility, and you didn't have to spend a single extra dollar. That's the power of playing the ratio. Okay, now let's apply this exact same logic to silver and oil. So why this specific pair? Well, gold is mostly a store of value, right? But silver is absolutely crucial for industrial production. And oil, well, that's the ultimate energy source for everything. Together, they literally represent the production backbone of the entire real economy. Their ratio gives us a seriously powerful way to measure real economic activity. But for this whole strategy to work, you've got to be able to trade barrels of oil just as easily as you can trade ounces of silver. And let's be honest, that's not easy. That is where tokenization comes in. It's all about turning a physical, real-world asset into a liquid digital token you can trade in an instant. Now, this right here is a really, really important distinction. You don't just tokenize the physical barrel of crude oil itself. That would be a logistical nightmare. Instead, what you tokenize is the enforceable legal right to that oil. You know, the paper contracts, the legal documents that actually prove ownership and control. And these are the specific legal instruments that actually get tokenized. It could be a warehouse receipt for oil that's sitting in a storage tank. It could be a bill of lading for oil that's on a tanker sailing across the ocean. It could even be an invoice for oil that's already been sold. Each of these represents a verifiable, enforceable claim on that real-world asset. Okay, so we've got the strategy, that's ratio playing, and we have the digital asset, the tokenized oil rates. Now we just need the engine to power it all securely. And this is a system called TNSA, which stands for Tokenized Notary Service Agreement. The best way to think of TNSA is like the legal and technical operating system for this entire market. It binds real-world, legally sound contracts to automated blockchain smart contracts. What that means is every single transaction is both legally compliant and automatically enforced by code. It bakes the rules right into the system from the start. This table shows you just how many layers of security are built into every single tokenized asset. First up, you've got custody proof. That's a cryptographic link to the actual warehouse receipt, proving the oil exists. Then there's attestation, a digital seal from a notary, proving it's authentic. It's also wrapped with real-world insurance, like a policy from Lloyd's of London, covering things like theft or loss. And finally, the encumbrance layer tracks any existing claims or liens, so you know for sure that the asset is clear and can't be pledged to two different people at once. So let's put this all into practice with a real-world scenario. Imagine an oil producer, and they're sitting on thousands of barrels of oil in storage. They need cash to run their operations, but they believe the price of oil is about to go way up. So the last thing they want to do is sell their physical barrels. What do? Okay, here's how they unlock all that value without actually selling a thing. First, they pledge their insured tank receipt into the TNSA registry. Step 2, the ratio engine instantly prices the value of that oil, not in dollars, but in ounces of silver. So for example, if oil is $75 a barrel and silver is $25 an ounce, the ratio is 3 barrels per ounce. And finally, the producer receives liquidity, spendable credits, all denominated in silver, while keeping full ownership of their oil. And this is the truly revolutionary part. The producer gets the cash they need to run their business, but they never, ever sold their oil. They've unlocked liquidity from a physical asset while still holding on to it, which means they're perfectly positioned to benefit from any future price increases. And that brings us all the way back to our big opening question. You know, when you can measure, trade, and secure value using real-world assets and transparent, automated rules, it really forces you to ask, why are we still using a broken ruler? Why measure with that when you can build a much, much better one?